Well, good evening, everyone, and welcome. Thanks for tuning in this evening for our online Bible study. Let's get into it. I welcome you. If you are new to this study, I'm Pastor Dave St. Aubin, and it's a joy to be with you here this evening. Tonight, we will be looking at the book of Ezekiel, chapter 20. So I invite you to grab your Bibles, open them up to Ezekiel 20, grab something to take some good notes with, grab a beverage, and grab a snack. Let's get into it. Well, again, good evening and welcome, and thanks for tuning in. I do pray that your day's been going well. Pray that you had a wonderful weekend, and I certainly do welcome you to this study. If you are new to our study here, I'm Pastor Dave St. Aubin, and it's a joy to be with you here this evening. We are continuing our journey through the Bible, one chapter at a time, and we have made it now into the book of Ezekiel, chapter 20. But we've not only made it to Ezekiel, chapter 20, we have hit a milestone here in our study together. This is our 600th study together. That is a amazing accomplishment, and so I just want to thank everybody for your time, your dedication, in being a part of this study. We began back in September of 2022 with Genesis chapter 1, and one chapter at a time, we've gone through the Bible. And we've made it now all the way into Ezekiel, and we are in chapter 20. So whether this is your first time with us, or you've been with us from the very beginning, or maybe you've joined somewhere in between, we welcome you. We have folks from all over the country, 13 different states, here in this study live on our Facebook channel, on our YouTube channel, and tuning in at other times other than our live stream. So wherever you're joining from, I do appreciate you being here. Ezekiel chapter 20, we have a lot to look at tonight as we begin our 600th study together. We are beginning the next section of this book, which will take us through chapter 23 later on this week. This section it's the final collection of prophecies that deal with the fall of Jerusalem and with Judah. In these messages that we're going to look at, Ezekiel is going to further clarify God's motivation for bringing this judgment on the people. And, that's one of the hardest tasks for us as Christians today, especially Christian leaders within the churches, is to keep the church true to the Word of God so that people don't follow these false prophecies, false teachers, these other celebrity type leaders who lead the people away from God, that teach messages that are contrary to God's word. And that's what has been happening to the people, and that's what Ezekiel has really been focusing on. This is a long chapter tonight, 49 verses. The first 44 of those are going to focus on the history of Israel's rebellion and God's grace in the midst of that. So the structure of this passage here that we're going to look at tonight is very clear. It's a review of Israel's history, and gives an introduction and a conclusion within this history. There's other important themes that are going to run throughout this chapter, including God's consistency in his grace in spite of this persistent rebellious attitude of the people. We're going to see this repetition of this wilderness experience for Israel because of their disobedience. And we're going to see God's concern for his own name, his own reputation. So again, lots to look at tonight. So let's get right into it here. Open up your Bibles to Ezekiel chapter 20. If you don't have a Bible with you, not a problem. As always, all the verses are up here on the screen for you so you can follow along, take some good notes, and let's get right into it here. Our 600th study together, Ezekiel 20, beginning with verse 1, and we see an introduction to this history lesson. So in the 7th year, in the 5th month, on the 10th day. So once again, we have the time frame. This event happens in the 7th year of King Jehoiachin's captivity, which was 591 BC, on the 10th day of the 5th month, which would have been August the 14th. Why is that important? Well, 11 months have passed since Ezekiel began sharing these messages that had begun way back in chapter 8. And so we have the time frame, and what this dating of prophecy does. Whenever you see dating of these prophecies, it indicates a new section of the book. We've looked at that throughout Jeremiah, and we've seen it here in Ezekiel. So whenever you see a chapter begin in such and such a year, in that date, on that month, it's an introduction to a new section and a new series of messages. So in the 7th year, in the 5th month, on the 10th day, some of the elders of Israel came to inquire of the Lord. We'll talk about that here in just a second. And they sat down in front of me. So the certain elders of the exiles, they come to Ezekiel and they inquire of the Lord. Inquiring of the Lord meant they were looking to secure some type of divine revelation concerning a particular event. And in view of the historical context here, the event they wanted information about was most likely King Zedekiah's attempt to secure help from the Egyptians in defeating the Babylonians. So they're coming with a ulterior motive, right? They're looking for some word from God to support their plan. Now, in this time period, in August of 591 BC, there was news of Egypt's victory in what is now the Sudan. And that victory, that military victory of the Egyptians, the news of that reached the remnants of these people of Judah in Tel Aviv. And there were rumors that indicated that Pharaoh would make now a triumphal conquest into Canaan, into the promised land. And so the exiles' expectations were heightened here. They hoped that Egypt was going to come in and be their redeemer and defeat Nebuchadnezzar and the Babylonians. So Zedekiah, he foolishly shares this dream. How did he do that? Well, when he revolted from Babylonian rule and he placed his confidence in the strength of the Egyptians, that is when that was somewhere between 591 and 589 BC. That was really the beginning of his downfall. That was an ill-timed move because after the Egyptians had this military victory in the Sudan, Pharaoh became sick. And so any potential of Egypt coming into the promised land to redeem the Israelites, it never happened. And so these elders, they're coming before Ezekiel. They want to know if Zedekiah, if his dream of the Egyptians being successful was going to come to pass. If the Egyptians were going to come in, defeat the Babylonians, and that the exiles could return back home. So just in those first couple verses, this is what we glean out of that. And that's why it's really important to go deep into scripture like this, because reading it on a surface level, we would have missed all of that. Like, why are these elders coming to inquire of the Lord? What does that mean? Well, now we know. They're looking for assurance that their dream of Egypt saving them from Babylon would happen. So verse 2, so the word of the Lord comes to Ezekiel. So in response to these elders, God is going to give Ezekiel a message for them. And he's going to tell Ezekiel He's not going to satisfy their curiosity about the Egyptians coming in to redeem them. So verse 3, Son of man, speak to these elders of Israel and say to them, this is what the sovereign Lord says, right? They came to inquire a word from the Lord. Here's the word from the Lord. Have you come to inquire of me? As surely as I live, I will not let you inquire of me, declares the sovereign Lord. Ezekiel was to communicate this message to the elders that includes judgment. They had participated in this idolatry, this abominable idolatry in the face of God that had characterized their history for centuries. And now they're going to come and ask God if God will allow the Egyptians to save them. Verse 4, God continues, will you save them? Will you judge them, Ezekiel, son of man? So God's repeated question here, will you judge them? Will you judge them? It has a emotional imperative to it. It means you must pass judgment on them, Ezekiel. You do this and confront them with the detestable practices of their ancestors. So God's history lesson for these elders describes 4 successive periods here. Their history in Egypt, coming next in verses 5 through 9. Their history in the wilderness, verses 10 through 26. Their history in the promised land, verses 27 through 29. And then the present time of Ezekiel here, verses 30 through 38. So what God is going to say about Israel's history in each of these 4 periods is this, that God had been good to the people, but the people had rebelled against God. And because of that, judgment followed. But even so, God still extended his grace. So verse 5, so say to them, this is what the sovereign Lord says. On the day I chose Israel, I swore with uplifted hand to the descendants of Jacob and revealed myself to them in Egypt. This is all referring to the time of Moses, to the Exodus. With an uplifted hand, I said to them, I am the Lord your God. So God is reminding these elders, he had chosen them. He had chosen to make himself known to this people, Israel. That this is Ezekiel's only reference to God as being, as choosing Israel as his elect. And God is reminding them, in that time, you were slaves. I made promises to you that I would be your God. This is a reference back to Exodus 6 and Deuteronomy 7. And on that day, verse 6, I swore to them, to the people Israel, that I would bring them out of Egypt into a land that I had searched out for them. So God begins this historical review with Israel's history as a nation in the time of the Exodus, not the time of Abraham in the book of Genesis. This is all speaking of the Exodus. And Israel really became a nation at the Exodus. Before the Exodus, the Israelites were really just a very large clan that came out of Abraham and Isaac and Jacob. But now they are, in the time of the Exodus, as they leave Egypt, they had become a nation, God's elect. And that he would lead them to this land that he had chosen, a land flowing with milk and honey. It was the most beautiful of all lands. So God had promised to be the Israelites' God, to bring them out of Egypt, to deliver them into the very best of the lands which he had selected for them to occupy. This goes back to Genesis 12, goes back to Exodus 3. Verse 7, and I said to them, each of you get rid of these vile images you have set your eyes on. Do not defile yourselves with the idols of Egypt. I am the Lord your God. Verse 8, but they rebelled against me. They would not listen to me. Remember, God's giving them a history lesson. You're coming to inquire of me if I will allow the Egyptians to help you. Let me lay it out for you, right? They did not get rid of the vile images they set their eyes on, nor did they forsake the idols of Egypt. God told these Israelites to abandon these detestable, defiling gods of Egypt because he was their God. And yet they rebelled against God. They refused to abandon these idols. So I said I would pour out my wrath on them and spend my anger against them in Egypt. Verse 9. But for the sake of my name, I brought them out of Egypt. So God had, he's going to judge his people for their rebellion, but he was still going to bring them out of this slavery in Egypt. I did it to keep my name from being profane. Remember, that's a theme here throughout this chapter of Ezekiel. And we'll talk about that again here in just a second. I did it to keep my name from being profaned in the eyes of the nations among whom they lived and whose sight I had revealed myself to the Israelites. So even though Israel failed to sanctify the name of the Lord among the nations, God would do it himself by delivering Israel from Egypt. God's name is profaned here in the sense that when people harbor thoughts of God that are inconsistent with his character as being holy and unique, we profane his name. The people, they did not glorify the name Yahweh. Instead, they rebelled in the eyes of the Lord. Next verse. And now we start to see Israel's rebellion in the wilderness. So the first few verses there were about their time coming out of Egypt. Now we see the wilderness. Verse 10. So therefore I led them out of Egypt. I brought them into the wilderness first. I gave them my decrees. I made known to them my laws, by which the person who obeys these laws will live. Also I gave them my Sabbath as a sign between us, so they would know that I, the Lord, made them holy. So God led the Israelites out of Egypt into the wilderness. This is speaking of the Sinai, Mount Sinai. At Mount Sinai, God gave the Israelites his statutes, his decrees, his laws that would result in their welfare if they obeyed them. This is the law through Moses that was given, the Mosaic law, the commandments of God. And God also gave them the day of Sabbath, the Shabbat, as a day of rest, as a sign of this special relationship. And it would be a blessing to them that they would enjoy because God had chosen them. And by observing the Sabbath, the Israelites would demonstrate their uniqueness among the nations, their sanctification unto God. The Sabbath was a dual sign to the Israelites. It reminded them of God's creation of the universe, Exodus 20, verse 11, and it reminded them of God's creation of them as a nation, Deuteronomy 5. The Sabbath was the central sign of the Old Covenant through Moses. And yet, verse 13, the people of Israel again rebelled against me. They rebelled against me in Egypt. Now they rebel against me in the wilderness. They did not follow my decrees. They rejected my laws. In fact, as God was giving Moses the commandments, the people were worshiping an idol that they fashioned themselves. They rejected my laws by which the person who obeys them would live, and they utterly desecrated my Sabbath. And so I said, I will pour out my wrath on these people, and I will destroy them in the wilderness. Even though God had given this covenant, the Israelites rebelled against God. They disobeyed his commands, and that led to God bringing judgment rather than blessing. And they also they dishonored the Sabbath. They made it common. They failed to observe the Sabbath as a special day of the week. Even though God had intended it to be a day of rest and remembrance for them, they made it just a common day. And because of that, God had vowed to kill them off in the wilderness. However, once again, God's reputation as Israel's Lord moved him to have mercy on them. God did not eliminate them in the wilderness. Verse 14, for the sake of my name, I did what would keep it from being profaned in the eyes of the nations in whose sight I had brought them out. Wiping out the Israelites in the desert would have made it appear to the other nations that God was unable to sustain this people and fulfill his promises to them. And so he says, for my name's sake. For my name's sake expresses one of God's motives in how, in dealing with humanity. And the name of God, it means so little to so many. But the name of God to God is infinitely precious to God. And consistent with his holiness, God is concerned in vindicating the honor of his name. That's why it's a commandment, right? We shall not blaspheme the name of the Lord. We shall not take it in vain. So for his name's sake, he would not eliminate the Israelites in the wilderness. Verse 15. And also, with uplifted hand, I swore to the people in the wilderness I would not bring them into the land I had given them. This land flowing with milk and honey, this most beautiful of all the lands, right? God told the people for disobeying him, they would not enter, including Moses, they would not enter that land because they rejected my laws, they did not follow my decrees, they desecrated my Sabbath, their hearts were devoted to their idols. God swore to the Israelites he would not wipe them out, but he would also not bring them into the promised land. That generation would not enter in because they rebelled against God and worshiped these idols. As you go through Ezekiel, idolatry, it's a theme over and over. This is the cause of the exile with Babylon. It's their idolatry. So God vows, you will not enter the promised land, but again, he shows his mercy. I looked on them with pity. I did not destroy them. I did not put an end to them in the wilderness. So God would not allow that generation to enter the promised land, but he spared them. And he did that because of Moses' intercession for them. And so they lived out the rest of their days in the wilderness. Verse 18, and so I said to their children in the wilderness, don't do what they did. Don't follow the statutes of your parents. Don't keep their laws. Don't defile yourselves with these idols. He's instructing the children of that generation that he had liberated from Egypt. Don't follow the bad example of your ancestors. For I am the Lord your God. Follow my decrees. Be careful to keep my laws. Verse 20, keep my Sabbath holy, that they may be a sign between us, and then you will know that I am the Lord your God. Because God was God, the people needed to remain faithful to the terms of the covenant through Moses that he had made with the people, making them into a nation. And he's warning this second generation, because the first generation out of Egypt was not going to enter the promised land. So God warns them, don't do what they did. Don't rebel against me. But they did. They rebelled against God, so he resolves to punish them all in the wilderness. But the children rebelled against me. They did not follow my decrees. They were not careful to keep my laws, of which I said the person who obeys them will live by them. They desecrated my Sabbath, and so I said, I will pour out my wrath on them, and I will spend my anger against them in the wilderness. But here's God's grace again. I withheld my hand. And for the sake of my name, which we just talked about, I did what would keep it from being profaned in the eyes of the nations, in whose sight I had brought the people out. And so with uplifted hand, I swore to the people in the wilderness, I would dispense them among the nations. I would scatter them throughout the world, because they had not obeyed my laws, but instead they rejected my decrees. They desecrated my Sabbath, and their eyes lusted after their parents' idols. So again, God withholds punishment for the sake of his name, the sake of his reputation, but he swore to these Israelites that he was going to scatter them among the nations of the world. He would disperse them among the other lands because of their unfaithfulness to the covenant. Verse 25. And so I gave them other statutes that were not good, and laws through which they could not live. And I defiled them through their gifts, the sacrifice of every firstborn, that I might fill them with horror, so they would know I am the Lord. So what does that mean? That God also gave these statutes that were not good for the people. And he did this in the sense that he allowed them to choose. You can choose to follow my laws, or you can choose to live by the rules of this unfaithful world that was going to lead you to misery and death. He also gave these ordinances that were too difficult to keep. And he did so in that it was intended so that he didn't lighten the responsibility of the law through Moses. What does all that mean? Well, when the people offered their children as sacrifices to these idols, as burnt offerings to these idols, that was God's punishment for their sin. It was their loss of their children. God commanded them, dedicate your firstborn to me, but God never told them to offer up their children as a burnt offering, as a sacrifice. And what is being said here, and Ezekiel is countering this, is that the Israelites are claiming, well, God commanded us to dedicate our firstborn to them, and so thereby he was authorizing this child sacrifice. So Ezekiel is countering this through God's word. That was never the law. You took that upon yourselves, and because of that, you are now being punished. So we see this history coming out of the Exodus, out of Egypt. We see the history in the Promised Land, or outside of the Promised Land, in the wilderness. Now we see this rebellion once they are in the Promised Land. And once again, though, we see God's grace, God's mercy. So therefore, verse 27, Son of man, speak to the people of Israel and say to them, this is what the sovereign Lord says. So God is instructing Ezekiel, keep talking for me, right? In this also your ancestors blasphemed me by being unfaithful to me, and this is how they did it. When I brought them into the land, I swore to give them this land, and when I brought them in, they saw any high hill or any leafy tree, and there they offered their sacrifices to these idols, and they made offerings, and those offerings aroused my anger, and they presented their fragrant incense, and they poured out their drink offerings to these idols. So the Israelites had been unfaithful to God in the Exodus. They had been unfaithful to God in the wilderness. Now they're in the Promised Land finally, and they're unfaithful again. They are blaspheming, slandering the name of the Lord with this unfaithfulness. After he brought them into the Promised Land, they still refused to end their practice of idolatry. And so verse 29, I said to them, what is this high place you go to? It is called Bama to this day. Now this is interesting play on words here. So God's confronting his people with their use of high places on hilltops for idolatry. And the name of these high places is called Bama. Bama has double significance. Bama means high place. So they went to the Bama, to the high hill, and made these temples and sacrificed their offerings here to these idols. But it also, Bama, means to go where? Like, where are you going? So there's a pun here, in a sense, where the people went to worship. God's asking, where are you going? You're not going anywhere of significance here. You're going nowhere of significance to do anything of importance, because these idols are non-entities that you made, and they can't help you. So there's a play on words here. You're going to the Bama, to the high places, but you're going nowhere. You're going to a place that is pointless. And that's the point of that section. So the Exodus the wilderness, the promised land, and now to the present day of Ezekiel here in verse 30. And once again, we'll see God's grace. So therefore, say to these Israelites, this is what the sovereign Lord says. Will you people in the day of Ezekiel, will you defile yourselves the way your ancestors did and lust after these vile images? Will you defile yourself the same way the people in the Exodus did and the people in the wilderness did and your ancestors that entered the promised land did? Are you going to do the same thing? Ezekiel is to ask these leaders that came before him if they plan to defile themselves as well and prostitute themselves out to all these things that the Lord detested, just as their ancestors did. When you offer your gifts, the sacrifice of your children in the fire, you continue to defile yourselves with all your idols to this day. Am I to let you inquire of me, you Israelites? That was the very first part of this chapter. They came to Ezekiel to inquire of the Lord. And God dresses them down here in these next verses and just really, you're going to come and ask me, as surely as I live, declares the sovereign Lord, I will not allow you to inquire of me. They too, these people of the day of Ezekiel, were defiling themselves through this practice of child sacrifice. And for that reason, God would not give them the answers to the questions that they brought to him through Ezekiel. Verse 32, he continues, you say we want to be like the nations of the world. We want to be like the peoples of the world who serve wood and stone. But what you have in mind is never going to happen. The dream of these elders was that Jerusalem would be delivered by the Egyptians. They would return from captivity in Babylon back to the land of Judah. And that would all happen very quickly. And that pipe dream was not going to happen because they had determined to be like the other nations of the world and worship false idols. As surely as I live, declares the sovereign Lord, verse 33, I will reign over you with a mighty hand and an outstretched arm and an outpouring of wrath. So here begins another promise of restoration to the land by God's grace. These descriptions of God doing this with a mighty hand and an outstretched arm, they recall the terms that were used at the liberation of the Israelites from Egypt back in Exodus 6. God would deliver the Israelites from slavery in Egypt with a mighty hand and an outstretched arm. And so what is in view here is a second Exodus. God would be their king. Not Nebuchadnezzar, not Jehoiachin, not Zedekiah. Jesus Christ is that king. God would be that king. No other worldly leader was going to help them. Verse 34, and I will bring you back from the nations. I will gather you from the countries where you have been scattered, with a mighty hand and an outstretched arm, and with unpoured wrath. So God here, he's answering these leaders. The way you want it to go down isn't going to happen, but let me tell you how it will. I will show mercy on you, and one day I will bring you back. I'm promising to bring you back from being scattered among the nations back to this land, and I would do so in a mighty way, with a great wrath towards the enemies of Israel. Verse 35, I will bring you into the wilderness of the nations, and there, face to face, I will execute judgment upon you. God's going to bring the Israelites back, but first he's going to bring them into another type of wilderness, a wilderness full of people. And there, God was going to personally judge them. And what this is referring to most likely is this regathering of the Jews from around the world back into the land of Canaan after the time of the Antichrist allows them to return to their homeland, where he will begin to persecute them. So this is speaking of the tribulation, this great tribulation. And in this time of tribulation, they will face God's judgment upon them. Verse 36, and as I judged your ancestors in the wilderness of the land of Egypt, so I will judge you, declares the sovereign Lord. Just as the Lord had judged the people in the wilderness after the time of the Exodus, so he would judge this group of Israelites in their time of exile. He would discipline them in order to sanctify them, set them apart. Verse 37, unique phrases here. I will take note of you as you pass under my rod. So this is a shepherd reference. It was customary for shepherds of that day to count their sheep as they passed under the shepherd's rod, that the shepherd would hold over the doorway of the sheepfold. So as the sheep were coming back in, the shepherd would hold his rod over the doorway of the sheepfold and would count the sheep as they come in. Reference to those passing under my rod. This is an allusion, the first allusion really, to the tithe. That goes back to Leviticus 27, where every 10th animal, so as the sheep comes in, the shepherd holds his rod and counts them. Every 10th sheep that passed under the rod was separated out and declared to be holy. That was the tithe. That was the offering back. This is another way of communicating the purpose of the exile, which was to purge and purify those who rebelled against God, which we're going to see here in a moment in verse 38. And I will bring you into the bond of the covenant. So God would bring his people under obligation to keep the terms of the covenant. This is a reference to the new covenant that we saw back in Jeremiah chapter 31. And I will purge you of those who rebel and revolt against me. So this, the bringing in of the sheep and counting them off, but also purging out and purifying the exiles. This purification of the exile would separate the righteous from the wicked. Next verse, although I bring them out of the land where they are living, yet they will not enter the land of Israel. Very similar, I will bring you out of Egypt, but you will not enter the promised land. He would weed out these rebels, these wicked transgressors from among the righteous, and would bring them out to the countries where they lived, but they would not come back to the promised land. And then you will know that I am the Lord. When all that happens, the people would know that the one who did all this was God. Verses 39 through 44 provide an application of everything we just looked at, this history lesson from God. So verse 39, as for you, people of Israel, this is what the sovereign Lord says. Go, serve your idols, every one of you. Just go do it. But afterward you will surely listen to me. You will no longer profane my holy name with your gifts and with your idols. So for now, the Israelites to whom Ezekiel is speaking, he's saying just go ahead, practice your idolatry. It's not going to happen with the Lord's blessing, of course, but just go ahead and do that. Because in the future, you're going to listen to the Lord and obey it. It'd be like a parent to a rebellious child and saying, fine, you want to go do it, just go do it. But I will have the last word on this. Verse 40, for on my holy mountain, the high mountain of Israel, declares the sovereign Lord, there in the land all the people of Israel will serve me. And there I will accept them, and there I will require your offerings and your choice gifts along with your holy sacrifices. So at that time, at that future time, all of Israel was going to serve the Lord, specifically on the holy mountain where the temple stood, on the Temple Mount. And then the Lord would accept their offerings of worship, their special gifts to him, all the things that they had devoted because of what they represented at that future time. that would happen. And I will accept you as a fragrant incense when I bring you out from the nations and when I gather you from the countries where you have been scattered. And I will be proved holy through you in the sight of the nations. And then you will know that I am the Lord when I bring you into the land of Israel, the land I swore with uplifted hand to give to your ancestors. So what all that means is the people, they were going to be like a soothing aroma to God after he judges them, and he would accept them. And he would then prove to them that he is holy among the nations. In other words, he is uniquely different from all these other so-called gods. The Israelites would recognize God when he fulfilled that promise to the patriarchs to give them the promised land. In verse 43, and there you will remember your conduct and all the actions by which you have defiled yourselves, and you will loathe yourselves for all the evil you have done. And you will know that I am the Lord when I deal with you for my name's sake, not according to your evil ways and your corrupt practices, you people of Israel, declares the sovereign Lord. So once they are back in the land of promise, they would remember their past sins. They would loathe themselves. They would come to know God for who God is, because they would recognize how graciously he dealt with them over the centuries as a people. The prospect of this future grace, this restoration, the blessing, it's always been the strongest motivation for holiness. And that's why this message ends as it ends. And really, a new chapter here begins in verse 45. And this is judgment of Judah's leaders of this day. So this section of chapter 20, verse 45, through chapter 21 tomorrow, verse 17, begins another chapter, another section of this book that has 4 messages of judgment on Judah, with a special emphasis on judgment coming on the leaders. And God's going to explain the basis for his judgment here in the first 44 verses that we just looked at. And then he's going to describe and affirm the certainty of that judgment to come with verse 45 through chapter 21, 32 tomorrow. So here we see this parable. Remember, the first 44 verses, God gives the basis for the judgment. Now he's going to affirm the certainty of it through this parable. So verse 45, then the word of the Lord came to me, Son of man, set your face towards the south. Preach against the south. Prophesy against the forest of the southland. So God's commanding Ezekiel to address the south and the forest of the southland. The forest of the Negev desert, which was the southernmost part of Judah, which was a geographical buffer between the fruitful part of Judah in the south and the wilderness part of Judah to the far south. The south also included Jerusalem. It included the temple. It included the land of Judah. Judah was the southern kingdom. When Israel separated, the northern kingdom was Israel, the southern kingdom was Judah. So this parable is a direct prophecy against Judah. Say this to the southern forest. Hear the word of the Lord. This is what the sovereign Lord says. I am about to set fire to you, you great forest in the south, right? And this fire will consume all of your trees, both green and dry. We'll talk about that. The blazing fire will not be quenched. Every face from south to north will be scorched by it. Everyone will see that I, the Lord, have kindled this fire, and it will not be quenched. So here, it becomes clear God is referring to the southern kingdom, Judah, and he's using trees or shrubs, depending on your translation, in the south to represent the people of Judah. God was going to judge the people of Judah similar to as a fire comes in and sweeps through a wooded area. In other words, it's going to be a wildfire. And all types of people will suffer. The righteous, that's the green tree. The unrighteous, that's the dry tree. And that judgment would affect the whole land. And then verse 49, and then I said, Sovereign Lord, this is Ezekiel speaking, they are saying of me, isn't he just telling parables? Ezekiel responds to the Lord that the people aren't taking what he just said to them seriously. They are explaining away this announcement of judgment as just a parable. It's a fictional story. It's not a symbolic message of any real judgment to come. 44 verses in this chapter. God outlines the history as a basis of why he's going to judge the people. And then he provides a parable that this is how it's going to come. This fire, Babylon, is going to sweep in, consume you all, the righteous and the unrighteous. And the response of these leaders, who in verse 1 said that they just came to inquire of the Lord, their response after Ezekiel gives all this, he's just telling a fairy tale. This is just, it's nonsense. All he's doing is giving us a parable. The rebellion of the people hasn't changed a bit. And that is Ezekiel chapter 20. A long chapter. Some of these really are. Some are shorter, but so much information in here. So I pray this has been a help. Go back and reread it. Check your notes again. And tomorrow we'll continue this parable. We'll look at the interpretation of it first, and then we'll continue in God's explaining of how this judgment was going to be carried out. He told them for 44 verses it was coming. Now he's going to give the certainty of it coming. So again, thank you for being here this evening. I do pray that this has been a help, and I appreciate you being here. And again, congratulations, 600 studies that we have been together. It's amazing. I'm truly blessed by being a part of this with you. Have a wonderful rest of your evening. Stay safe, stay warm, stay healthy, and I look forward to seeing you very soon. Till then, take care, and God bless. Bye-bye.